Okay, we are live. Welcome to the Parsha class, Parshat Vayera 5784. And we have quite a Parsha class planned for you today. First, we'll give a quick summary of what happens in the Parsha. Then we'll go into some detail about some of those issues and situations. So, first of all, we know that at the end of last week's Parsha, Avraham Avinu had a Brit Milah, had a circumcision, and Hashem appeared to him in the beginning of this week's Parsha and is talking to him, whatever that means. Again, different opinions of what it is to see Hashem or to be visited by him. Last week we spoke about the idea that seeing Hashem means to grow in your spirituality. And while this is happening, three seeming Bedouins arrive, and Avraham drops everything, drops the call on Hashem, and runs to take care of these guests. And at this point, one of these guests, which Chazal tell us were actually angels, one of them says that this time next year, you're going to have a baby. You're going to have a baby boy. So Sarah overhears this and she laughs. And there's a whole discussion, which we've spoken about in previous years, about why she laughed, who's she laughing at, does she not believe in the prophecy? And of course, we also know that in last week's Parsha, Hashem also promises Avraham that he will have a son. He already gives him the name of Yitzchak, that his son will carry. So it seems strange that there's any doubt at all. It could be that she was just doubting the words of this, again, seeming Bedouin, and not so much doubting the actual prophecy itself. How that fits with the words, exactly what she said about how she's old, that's a different story, worth some investigation, but maybe for another year. The one of the pieces of prophecy that Abraham receives at this point is that Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed, and Avraham, being the person of love, the person of gentleness, the person of giving, he realizes immediately that his job is to pray for them. And he prays that they be saved, whether they have 50 righteous people or 40 or 30, and he basically bargains it down to 10. And if there were 10 righteous people in all of Sodom, then they would have been saved. And alas, they didn't even have 10. They couldn't even have a minion of good people, and they were worthy of destruction. However, Abraham's nephew Lot, who lived in Sodom, was worthy of rescue. He and his daughters escape, and we know there's the whole story there. We've spoken about it in previous years, but we'll see some other details about it this year with regard to his daughters and their seduction of him, thinking that the world had been destroyed, and being the progenitors of the nations of Moav and Amon. And at this point, Avraham and Sarah, another famine hits the land. They go to Avimelech. Avimelech kidnaps Sarah, and he is cursed. He is punished, and he apologizes. And at which point he is then spared, and he gives many gifts to Avraham and Sarah. And Sarah, by the way, eventually becomes pregnant, has Yitzchak, and then he is circumcised at 8 days. He is the first person to have that distinction. And at this point, as he grows up, Yishmael seems to be bothering him, seems to be a bad influence of some sort, and Sarah has Avraham exile Hagar and her son Yishmael, and then almost immediately after that, Avraham is commanded to take Yitzchak to the mountain for the famous Akedat Yitzchak, which we will discuss in some detail later on today in today's class. The sacrifice of Yitzchak on Har HaMoriah, which would eventually become the mountain on which the Beit HaMikdash would be built. And the last thing that happens in the parsha is right after that, Avraham is informed, whether prophetically or the rumor mill. Either way, he's informed that he has nieces born, Rivka, and that maybe it's time now to find a shidduch for Yitzchak, which we will see in great detail next week's parsha. All right, good summary, more or less. That's much shorter than the Torah reading. let's get right into the text itself, and we'll start with like there are a lot of places we could start, but I think a good idea for us is to look into some detail the story of Lot and his daughters. After their miraculous rescue from Sodom, it says Vayal Lot Mitzoar V'yeshev Behar Shtei V'notavimo. He went to live in the mountains with his two daughters. Remember, his wife didn't make it. She turned into a pile of salt because she turned back and looked at Sodom after they were told not to look. So why did he go into the mountains? He's afraid to live in Tzor. He wanted to live like away from people. There weren't people there yet, but he was basically traumatized. He didn't want to live in a city again and have something like that happen again. So he decided to live way out in the sticks, in the mountains. He became a hillbilly. Vatomer Habchira El Hatzira, the oldest daughter said to the younger daughter, Avinu Zaken, our father's old, the Ish Ein Ba'ar, so there's no man left on earth. They did not see civilization anymore. They thought everybody was dead. There aren't any men who are available for us to marry. Kederach Kol Haaretz is the proper way, as goes usually according to the ways of the world. So she says, "L'cha nashket avinu yayin, v'nishkacha imo, v'nichiyah me'avinu zera." So we should get our father drunk with wine, and then we'll copulate with him, and we'll have children from our father. Indeed, v'tashakena et avihen yayin b'laylahu. They got their father drunk with wine that night. V'tahoa b'chira. Batishkav El Aviha, so the older one went and she slept with her father. Lo yada bishichva uvkuma, and he did not know about her laying down or her getting up. In other words, he was unaware of what was going on, and so he's not held responsible for this disgusting act. Then, of course, next day, Vayhim Macharat, and it was the next day, Vatoma, Bechira, it's Ira. The older one says to the young one again, Hein, Shechavti, Emesh, et Avi, Nishkenu Yain, Gam Halayla Uvoi, Vishikvi Imo, Nichia Me'avinu Zara. Again, let's get our father drunk, and you lie down with him. Vishkena Gam Balayla Hahu, and they did the exact same thing again. At Avihan Yain, they got him drunk with wine again. The younger one went and lay down with him. And he did not know about her laying down and her getting up. Okay, and that's not enough. The Torah gives the historical consequences of this. The two daughters of Lot had children from their father. The older one had a son, Moav, and she called him Moav, who Avi Moav Adhem, and he's the father of Moav until today. Moav, says Rashi's Me'av, it means from my father, Me'av. So she sort of advertised the fact that Moav is a product of this kind of incest. Hatzira Gam Hi Yalda Bain, and the younger one also had a son, V'tikra Shmo Ben Ami, and she called his name the son of my nation. Hu Avi Bnei Amon Ad Hayom, and he's the father, he's the progenitor of the people of Ammon until this day. Until which day, by the way? Until the day that the Torah was, until the Jewish people until the Jewish people went into Israel with the Torah, and at that point, there were still these two nations of Moav and Amon. Obviously, that doesn't mean that they're going to be around forever. They are not. We don't have Moav and Amon today. They've been mixed in, thanks to Sanheriv, into many other different kinds of Arabs and other groups. And that's the story. So, so there's a verse. And the verse says, I'm trying to find it here. Yeah. Ki yisharim dachi Hashem, v'tzadikim yelchu bam, v'foshim yikashlu bam. The roads of Hashem are straight, says the Gemara. But says the pasuk in Hosea 14:10. Hosea 14:10 says, so the roads of Hashem are straight, and tzadikim, the righteous people, yelchu bam, they walk along it. V'foshim yikashlu bam, and the people who are not tzaddikim, they stumble on them. So who does that apply to? So basically the idea is that one road, depending on if you're good or righteous, can get you to your destination. Good people can travel on the road. Evil people will stumble on the road. Meaning, the metaphor goes, the Gemara applies this to other situations, but what it's trying to tell you is the very, very same act for some people can be of benefit, and that same act done by somebody else, in this case, a not righteous person, the same act can lead to their downfall. And then they apply this parable, this saying, to Lot. Mashal says, Ela mashal lelot shnei benotav imo. This is a parable, this is a metaphor for Lot and his two daughters. How? And shitikavnu l'shem mitzvah. It was the daughters, they wanted to do a mitzvah. They thought that civilization was over, that there were no men left. You know, the old saying, I wouldn't do this if you were the last man on earth. So in this case, in their minds, Lot was the last man on earth. And so they wanted to do a mitzvah. They wanted to repopulate the world, which is, by the way, a mitzvah. There's a machloket, actually, whether it's a mitzvah on men and women. I believe most people say that it is a mitzvah on women as well. So tzadikim yelchuvam, so they're like these righteous people who go on the road and they get to where they're going. Who shnitkaven l'shem avera, but if he had relations with these women in his sleep or whatever, in his drunken state, obviously he wasn't thinking about any kind of mitzvah while he was doing it. So he poshim yikashluvam, that was his downfall. The Gemara asks, Dilma who nami mitzvah yikavin? Maybe he had the same intent. How do you know he didn't have the same intent? That he also wanted to do a mitzvah? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara answers. Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol hapasuk hazeh al shem avera ne'amar. The next verse proves that that Lot was only interested in the sin aspect. And what's the pasuk? Pasuk is actually one second. This is an earlier verse from last week's parsha when Lot and Avraham split up, and Avraham told him to find land and then he'll go the other direction. And what does the verse says? It says, "V'yisa Lot Lo raised his eyes. Tisa asher so no, wrong verse. He's V'yisa lot es inav yaret kol kikar hayarden arkula mushke. He went and saw that the whole land was very watered. Was a good place to make a to have it seems like it was a good land to have sheep and such. But the Gemara, through a series of other verses, says no, that's not all it means, because it uses the word einav here and it uses einav in another verse. So where with regard to Potiphar's wife and her attempted seduction of Yosef, and Shem, and how he fell in love with Dinah, and a lot of other verses basically comes out to the fact that when Lot looked up back then in that verse, when he was looking for a land to settle in, and he settled on Sodom, it basically implies that he had the character already inside him then to do this kind of sin that he's responsible for with his daughters now. Meaning that he was involved, and this was a sin for him, and it was a bad thing. The Gemara is not satisfied with that. You may not be as well. It says, "Umay havale." No, sorry. Sorry. So he mainas anis. He was forced. It was in a case of ones. He didn't know what he was doing. He was sleeping. He was drunk. He had no idea what he was doing. How could you fault him for this sin? So the Gemara answers, Tana Mishum Rabbi Yossi bar Rav Chuni. The Tana said the name of Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rav Choni. Lama nakud alvav uvkuma shel bechira. Why is there a dot over the letter vav of the word uvkuma when it says when she rose up? One of the verses we read earlier. Lomar shebeshikva v'lo yada aval b'mkuma yada. So to teach you to focus on the fact that he did know that she was lying down. Others, he knew that he was getting that his daughter was getting in bed with him. He just didn't know that she left. So what could he have done? So if he still could have been forced. So whatever happened. In other words, Lot didn't realize that what happened was he impregnated his daughter until she left, until she had a child. That's when he knew. What could have he done until then? Nafkamina. So the answer is he could have done something different. That he should not have drunk wine that second night. In other words, if he knew what happened, he figured it out at the end of the first night. So how could he then go on and do the same? Or he knew what was happening in the beginning of the event. He might have not known the conclusion, but certainly that was enough of a warning that he shouldn't have done the same thing the next night. By getting drunk the next night, it proved that he didn't mind so much what happened the night before, even though he knew what was happening in the beginning, apparently. Darash Rava explains. He explains a verse in Mishlei that about rebellious brothers. Basically, because Lot was the cause of so much machloket with Avraham, therefore that's why Lo Yavo Amon Moavi b'Kal Hashem. That's why there's going to be a verse later on, all the way towards the end of Devarim, where we learn that people from Ammon and Moab are not allowed to marry into the Jewish people. Which, by the way, is an interesting thing. We know that the Moavi, Lo Moaviyah, as we learned with regard to the story of Ruth, is that men from Moav and Ammon cannot marry Jewish women. However, vice versa, we do allow of course, assuming that they convert and everything else. But the important thing here is that there's a difference between the men and the women. The Marshal here in the Gemara actually tells us that the reason that there's a difference between the men and the women is because of this, because these girls for sure were interested in the mitzvah of preserving human life. Therefore, their descendants, the women descendants from Moav and Amon, they are also somehow classified with those daughters that they have the right intent, as opposed to the men of Moav and Amon, who seem to go with after their ancestor Lot, who had unfortunately licentious intent with regard to his daughters. And that's what the Gemara there says. It says more. This is the Gemara, by the way. I didn't cite the source. This is the Gemara in Nazir 23a towards the bottom, and onto the next page, which we didn't really see so much, but it's there. All right. So again, what did we learn today so far? We spent quite a bit of time. We had a summary of the parsha, and then we started talking about Lot and his daughters, and we saw why it is that the rabbis consider his daughters more or less blameless for this act, even though it's completely their idea. But at least their intent was good. So yes, the actions in and of themselves might have not been great, but because their intent was good, there's some sort of I don't want to call it reward, but the consequence is much less severe than the consequence for Lot, that the Gemara learns out was somewhat responsible. And why was he responsible? Not because of what he knew in the beginning, but more because you could see from how he acted the next night, and he let himself get drunk. That's an indication that he was not so much against this activity. All right, let's skip forward to the birth of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is born, and the verse tells us, "V'yigdal hayeled Yigmal." The boy grew up and he was weaned. He was no longer taking milk from his mother. V'yas Avraham mishta gadol, and Avraham made a big party. But Yom Higamel at Yitzchak, he made a big party on the day that Yitzchak was weaned. A weaning party. When's the last time you went to a weaning party? We don't do that anymore, right? And it's a little bit strange that he had it at all. Never mind, as we learned in our Jewish life cycles class, we might have learned that the birthdays themselves are not always considered a very Jewish activity. Celebrating a weaning is definitely not something I didn't see that advertised in the last Mishpacha magazine. So why is Avraham doing this? So to get an answer, we're going to look at the Brisker Rav, the Chidushay Hagriz on this parsha. So it says, "V'yegdel hayeled Yigmal v'yas Avraham mishta gadol b'yom haGemal et Yitzchak." B'Rashi, and Rashi says, "V'yigmal l'sof chav daled chodesh." He was weaned at 24 months old. V'hine pashad hu dehamishta hu begeder hodia al hanes. Seems obvious that he had this party to thank Hashem for this miracle. What miracle? The miracle of having a child. So if that's true, it's Harachian, we need to investigate. Lama heicha Avraham et sof chav daled chodesh lo asa mishta b'yom huledet Yitzchak shezeh harehu guf hanes. Why are you waiting 24 months, which is like 2 years, instead of having this party after the first year, the first birthday? Would have been great. Birthday party for Yitzchak. That shows that you're grateful for the miracle of Yitzchak's birth, which, by the way, was obviously miraculous. Avraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90 years old. That's a miracle. V'nir dehine la'el yud zayin tet zayin. 17, 16, it says, "V'chati ota vet natati b'mena lecha ben u'rachticha." I will give you a son and I will bless you, said the verse. B'hanikat shadim ayin sham. So it could be because that blessing was that milk would come out of Sarah. There were two miracles. One miracle is that Sarah was able to have a child. But there's a second miracle, and that's that she's able to feed the child. They didn't have to hire any wet nurses. They didn't have to buy Similac or anything else, right? They didn't have to invent powdered breast milk substitutes or anything like that. Rather, Muvor shayu beit nisim etzel Sarah dechutz mima sholidu hutzrucha lebracha v'neis miyuchad shetochal lahanik. It's an amazing miracle that she was able to also nurse the child. And that is what is being celebrated here with this party. Not just the birth, but also the other miracle that Sarah was able to feed him. And therefore, this party marks both the celebration of both miracles. That's really what we'd like to emphasize here, is that when Hashem does miracles for us, and he does them on a constant basis, it's our job to recognize every single possible little detail of that miracle. When we thank Hashem, we say thank you for our health, right? We say Asher Yatza. There's a lot of steps in Asher Yatza. We say we talk about the different pores and holes and tubes and the whole internal apparatus of the human being and how it's all working. If I'm standing here healthy enough to say a bracha right now, what that means, Hashem, is that you make me alive all the time through all these constant miracles. I'm just always in awe. I don't know how much you know about the blood system. It's an amazing, unparalleled miracle that the heart pumps blood and blood gets deposited from your arteries into exactly where they need to go, into all the veins and all the all the muscles. Everything gets the blood it needs, all from without any education, without any if you think of the capillary system and such as like little stops on a subway station, right? Obviously, a subway operator needs to have a map, needs to know where to stop, needs to know where to go, and needs to know where to go, and needs to know what time to be there, and there's a schedule, and the right amount of people come off the train. Not always, right? Sometimes there's no room, so they have to wait till the next train. This doesn't happen in the blood system. Always the blood goes exactly where it needs to go, without a map, without an education, without any kind of real communication besides electrical impulses from the nerves or whatever. But it all happens automatically and so fast. If you measure the amount of space, the amount of mileage that your blood system has, and how fast things get to where they're going, it's. I mean, if only human beings could copy it, we'd be able to travel from one place to all the way across we'd be able to get from San Diego to Yerushalayim in like a split second. It's really that complex and that amazing. And again, it's worth our time to think about, to contemplate. That's the whole reason why we have these sciences, why we have this knowledge, is so that when we look at the world, when we look at how plants operate, how weather operates, and we are able to, when we thank Hashem for Mashiva Ruach U'Morida Geshem or anything like that, we can have in mind all of the different factors that needed to go into making that happen. That's an amazing idea. And that's why Avraham had this party. It's not that he's trying to teach us that there's a mitzvah to have these parties. It isn't. That's why you don't have too many of them. But the reason that Avraham had it is because for him, for sure, it was a big miracle. And the completion of the miracle of Yitzchak's birth and Yitzchak's feeding, that completion happened when Yitzchak was weaned. And that's why he has this party. All right, let's go on to the next part. So as we said in the summary, Yishmael and Hagar get kicked out. They get, besides they get physically exiled, also Yishmael is technically uninherited, disinherited from Avraham, which ordinarily should be a problem halachically, because the Torah tells us later on, all the way in Devarim, we're told that a father cannot pick and choose, his favorite child from his favorite wife to get an inheritance. He has to give the inheritance, the double inheritance anyway, to his firstborn ordinarily. So he has a firstborn. He has a Yishmael. So why is he able to disinherit him and not, besides not giving him the double portion that he's supposed to get? He's not going to get any portion at all. So the answer is, what can be found in a beautiful essay from the Pachad Yitzchak, Yitzchak Hutner. Although, truth be told, I was wondering if I should say this in a recorded class, but I'll say it anyway. It was probably Rebbetzin David, his daughter, who wrote this essay. So take it for what it's worth. That's Zichrona Livracha. All right. So we're in chapter 21, verse 10, and Sarah is speaking. She says, and she said to Avram, Garesh ha'ama hazot, that Binah, get rid of, kick out this slave woman and her son, ki lo yirash ben ha'ama hazot, because this son of this servant will not inherit im bini im Yitzchak, with my son, with Yitzchak. So there's a few halachic issues with this. So first of all, besides the one we already mentioned, that he can't pick and choose which sons are going to inherit him, it seems very strange that he has to be kicked out because he's not inheriting. Let's kick her out. He's not behaving, whatever. He's a bad influence on Yitzchak. Okay, kick him out. Garesh. What is it? What is this whole lo yirash ben ha'ama hazot? She will not inherit. That's one question. That's the second question. Another question: who is Sarah to say whom should inherit from whom? Right? Who's gonna inherit from Avram? Lo yirash ben ha'ama hazot im bini im Yitzchak. It's not hers. It's Avraham's. Avraham decides who inherits him. It's not Sarah's inheritance. If Sarah doesn't want Yishmael to inherit from her part of the estate or whatever, she doesn't have to say anything. He's not going to. He's not related to her. It's also a little bit wordy. Last question. Just want to point out, right? Lo yirash ben ha'ama hazot, the son of this slave woman. By the way, he has a name. Yishmael. She could have said that, or not say anything at all. Lo yirash hazot, this guy won't inherit. Lo yirash hazeh im bini im Yitzchak, with my son, with Yitzchak. Again, very wordy. Why im bini im Yitzchak, with my son, with Yitzchak? We know your son is Yitzchak. We got that. The last few verses in the Torah, although I don't have it on the source sheet, it's pretty clear. We're talking about Yitzchak being Sarah's son, right? So, like, why all this focus? So the Pachad Yitzchak, and this is in an essay that's found in a Sefer Zichronot. It's in like a memorial book written in the Pachad Yitzchak's honor. So to begin to explain this, we need to talk about a particular verse. There is a verse in the Torah that says, H-Shem says, I will remember, Zacharti et biti Yaakov, et biti Yitzchak, et biti Avraham eskor, v'aretz eskor. So I will remember the covenant with Yaakov, the covenant with Yitzchak, and the covenant with Avraham, and the land I will remember. This is the saying of Hashem. So what's interesting is, with each one of these britot that are mentioned, each one of these covenants, the Torah uses the word et. Zacharti et briti. So et is an untranslatable word in English. We've mentioned this before. But according to the Gemara, according to an opinion in the Gemara, et is used to include something else or someone else. So the classic example is when it says in the Ten Commandments, when it says you should fear your mother and your father. So it says et avika ve'et imecha. Et, again, not translatable, so it includes something else. The Torah tells us, the Gemara flushes it out, that we're talking about also that a person should honor their older sibling. Right? So that they're included because of the word et. By the way, et is spelled aleph and taf, the first and last letters of the alphabet, and that sort of hints to the idea that something else is included. Everything that's between aleph and taf, et. So there's other things there, other things to include, and that's why such a word is used. So the Pachad Yitzchak brings a sifra, a midrash, that says, Keshehem sheyesh brit avot, just as there is a brit with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, kach yesh brit imahot. There's also a certain covenant that Hashem made with the foremothers. Yeah, and that would be Sarah, next week's parsha Rivka, and then Leah and Rachel, all included in this concept of the four imahot, and they also have a brit. And that's why it says et zacharti et briti Yaakov. Et briti means not just the brit with Yaakov, but also the brit with Yaakov's wives. Briti et Yitzchak, not just the brit with Yitzchak, but also Yitzchak's wife Rivka. The zacharti et briti Avraham doesn't just include Avraham, but the et also includes that there's a special brit with his wife, with Sarah. There's a brit now with Sarah. Now we've got something to talk about. Because, by the way, brit, Perish Hagra, Shebrit, Rachel Leah, Achat. It's not like they both get a separate brit. Rachel and Leah have to share one as the wives of, as co-wives of Yaakov. Ainu Mishum, Shaya Kashalo, Hare Yishna and Dalari Mahod V'ra Gimel Britot. Okay, so Lefi Zeh Nira Shapirish Mamar Sarah Avraham Gerish et Bini et Ben Ha'ama Hazot Ki Lo Yirash et Bini Im Yitzchak. So he continues and says Bipshuto. Simple explanation is Ein Lezeh Hemshach. The ito yesh b'shniat hirusha siba l'chayev hagirshunim shel Yishmael oma hakavana b'zeh shekivan shelo yirash leven garesh. So it could be there's a simple explanation. He's not going to inherit. He's been kicked out. Ketzad miniat hayirusha mechayevet et hagirushin. So what is the connection between this kicking out and his inheritance? There's a special issue that can be found here. Sharei minchat haaretz yoneketi mishnei mekorot. We have the land of Israel because of two different things: Yerusha ubrit. Number one, it's an inheritance for us. We inherited it from Avraham, whose land it was, and we are his heirs, and we inherit the land. But there's also one other thing, and that is bracha. sorry, Brit. Brit is the idea of covenant. Klomar yesh kan brit shel Yerushat haaretz. There's a covenant, a promise that we will get the Yerusha. V'alo le'inyan Yerusha sagi im hamorish hu aviv. And the covenant, the inheritance from your father isn't enough here. V'olai mitzad habrit le'inyan shegam ha'im tiyeh merusha morisha kishehem sheyesh brit la'avot kach yesh brit le'imahot. So from your father's side, you get the land. That's the covenant of the fathers. However, nimsa sheyesh kan stira be'etzem shahalech lezichia l'Eretz Yisrael. Right, so but there's still going to be a contradiction, a seeming contradiction, between the idea of this covenant, the brit, and the actual inheritance of the land. Which takes precedence? Yeah, so we said that Yashuv Hastira. We can settle this disagreement, this seeming contradiction. We can settle it. Hazu hu ha'okem b'ma'amara shel Sarah. By focusing on what it is that Sarah said. What did she say? Gurashat ben ha'ama, the son of this slave woman. Muvnohu ata tzarich la'asot kan she'asa shel ha'iveret nachala. Garish et ben ha'ama, you have to kick out the son of the slave woman. Nitparish b'muvan ha'avar oto b'nachala ta'acha. You have to kick him out of this land that's going to be the inheritance otherwise. Lama alecha la'asot et zeh. Why do you have to do this? Because so that he does not inherit with my son with Yitzchak. Koloma, teaching you. Brit ha'aretz nichreta gam iti. She'en mishtayach li ein lo chelek ba'aretz. So by kicking him out, he won't have a portion of the land. Avahalaha aretz he b'Yerusha, isn't the land part of the inheritance? He can come back, right? Just because you're kicked out of the land doesn't mean you're not going to inherit the land. L'Yerusha sagi im hu bincha l'chein hachova hi alecha la'avir oto v'nachla v'zeh ata yachol la'asot b'Torah morish u'memela l'kaim brit iti. So even if the covenant is for whatever reason in the future dissolved, there's still the inheritance that does not get dissolved. But be'emed im haya nemar la'Avraham kol asher tomar alecha Sarah shema b'kola. That's why H-Shem had to tell him to listen to Sarah, to listen to her voice. Haya sagi le'inyan gerusha Yishmael mibeito shel Avraham, because he had to kick him out of his house. V'lo hayu tzrichim klal lahagid lo ki davka b'Yitzchak yikara l'chazer. So that only Yitzchak would be called Abraham's seed. So once Yitzchak is the only one to be called his seed, you can add to this. He adds to this. Right. So okay. So again, so what we're saying is because of the fact that there's a separate brit, separate covenant with the imahot, Sarah has a say in where her blessing is going to go, right? Where her bracha is going to go, and she says, "My bracha, I want only for Yitzchak, only for my son, only for Yitzchak." So that brit that was with the ladies, even if the Yerusha, even for whatever reason, the inheritance no longer belongs to Avraham. There is still an inheritance cycle that goes with the women, and Sarah is saying, I want my inheritance, my brit, my covenant with Hashem to go only to Yitzchak. Meaning, by the way, in case you're curious, that aside from everything else that happens, in Jewish history, even if the Jewish people are kicked out of the land, as we have been, we're always able to come back. And that's not in the schut necessarily of the Avot, and it's not because of our forefathers. It's certainly not always because of our own merits, but it could be that it's in the schut of the brit that was made with our foremothers. Because Sarah, Rachel, Rivka, Leah, put them out of order a little bit, but because of their righteousness, because of their greatness, their descendants will one day inherit the land. And that is what that is the ball that Sarah started rolling at that point, kicking out Yishmael from the land when it was time for Yitzchak to know what land he would be inheriting. All right, let's we have a few more minutes. Let's skip to pretty much the end of the parsha. The Akedat Yitzchak. Avraham, one second, I have a second. Avraham is told to bring his son Yitzchak up to the mountain to kill him. And it's not an easy mitzvah to do. It's they consider it, most people who count Avraham's challenges and tests consider this amongst them. Obviously, for all we know, the hardest of them, according to most opinions. And the verse tells us, chapter 22, verse 12. There's an angel stopping Avraham from committing the sin, the mitzvah, sin, whatever you want to call it, of killing his son. And he tells him, "Vayomer al tishlach yadcha el anar." Do not send out your hand against the young man. Va'al ta'aslo mu'uma, and don't do anything to him. Why? Ki ata with an ayin means now, because now yadati, now I know, yirei Elokim ata, that you are somebody who fears Hashem. V'lo chasachta et bincha et yichidcha mimeni. You did not withhold your son, your beloved one, your only one, not beloved one, your only one from me. Okay. Says Rashi, it's a famous Rashi, that we look at very often and perhaps we don't really think about too much. It says, Amar Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba taught. Amar lo Avraham. This angel who is speaking to Avraham, he says, what he's saying is, Aparish lefanecha et sichati. Sorry, this is no. Amar lo Avraham. Avraham said to him. Sorry, Avraham said to back to the angel. We got to talk about this. You got to explain this to me. You got a lot of explaining to do. Etmol amartali. Yesterday you told me. In other words, previously, 3 days earlier, not really yesterday. Earlier you said, Ki Yitzchak yikara lecha. No, more than 3 days. You used to say many years ago. You told me that Yitzchak would be my zera, would be my seed, would be my inheritance, as we just said from the last verse. Zacharta amarta. Then you went back and you changed what you said. And you said, Kach net bincha, take your son for this sacrifice. So first you say Yitzchak is going to be, your heir. Then you say, go take your son. And now you're saying to me, don't send out your hand against the child, against the young man. So make up your mind. You're like a schizophrenic angel. Yeah, your son is going to live. Your son is going to die. Your son is going to live. Make up your mind. So Amar Lo Kadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem says back to Avraham, Lo Achel Briti, I didn't mess up our brit, our covenant. Moses Sfatai, Lo Ashane. I never changed from what I say I'm going to do. So when I said that your son is going to be your heir, he is going to inherit you. So what about this other piece about go kill your son? So regarding that, Kisha Marti Lecha Kach, when I told you to take your son, Moses Fati Lo Hashaneh, I still wasn't changing what I said. Lo Marti Lecha, I did not say to you, Shechatehu. I didn't tell you to shecht him. I didn't tell you to kill him. Ella, all I said is Halehu, bring him up. Askate, and you brought him up. And now that you brought him up, Achate, good. Now take him down. In other words, seemingly what Rashi's saying is that Hashem never told Avraham to sacrifice his son, and it seems that it was just a misunderstanding of Abraham's that he was supposed to do that. But this is a big problem. By saying this, what you're saying is that one of the most important, one of the most central events in, if not human history, certainly Jewish history, of Abraham's attempted sacrifice of his son, was all just a misunderstanding. He read the text wrong. Right? He misunderstood what Hashem wanted. Hashem always wanted Yitzchak to live, and when he told him to just take Yitzchak up to the mountain, what he meant was take him on a hike. He didn't say to kill him. Never said kill. What do you see? He says kill. Avraham interpreted it that way. So it seems to be Avraham's mistake. To say the central event in Jewish history is just one big misunderstanding is a little bit difficult. So therefore, Rav Gedalia Shor, my Rosh Yeshiva's father, writes in Or Gedaliahu, he quotes this Rashi, and he brings up the same question. Hikshum Mefarshim Lama Hametin Avram Avin Olav Shalom Hashkod Kushaito Asher Emar Lo Al Tishlach Yadka. Why Eleanor? Why is Avram asking this question now? Well, Tishkach Hefach, and he didn't ask him before when he told him to bring him up. Right? Hashem told him to bring him up, so that would have been a good time to say, what kind of bringing up are you talking about, God? You mean like the kind of bringing up, like going on a hike, bringing up, or bringing up like putting him on an altar, hint, hint, wink, wink, bringing up? To clarify. So he says, start here on the left side here. Mipashtu dvarim, simple explanation to these words is mashma ki Avram Avinu alav shalom lo hevin hanavua. It sounds like he just didn't understand the prophecy. What other prophecies did he misunderstand? This is a problem. It says, v'chas v'shalom lo markein. Chas v'shalom, you should say this. Shata Avram Avinu, the perish hanavua, that he misunderstood it as nevuah. Don't say it like that. Ukedimetzinu b'midrash, Tanchuma says in the midrash, shebe'ed she'amar lo hasatan masha. So there's a whole discussion there with Avram and the Satan in the midrash. He argued with the Satan. So it's not like he didn't understand the nevuah. He understood it fine. So what's Rashi saying? So Yidum anu ki b'chol masei hamitzvot lo dai b'machshava levad. It's not enough to have an intent when you do a mitzvah. She'i efshar la'adam l'tzeit yidei chovato be'asiyat mitzvah al yidei chashavta. Machshava. Right? You can't fulfill your obligation of a mitzvah just by thinking it. Oh, I have all these deep kavanas about tefillin. I have all these deep thoughts, the arizals, ideas of what shapes and symbols and letters. Okay, I have all these ideas. Okay, I did my mitzvah of tefillin. No. You have a mitzvah of tefillin. If you have all the right kavanot when you're putting on tefillin, great, wonderful. But if you have all these kavanot and all these intents, but then you don't do the mitzvah, you've done nothing. Machshava is nothing by itself. Right? It says, she's bonin ki b'shikalu kol hakavanot shel mitzvah v'yichayashuv ilu asa masa mitzvah ki amol al adam hu asiyat mitzvah al yidei asiyat mitzvah yachol ha'adam lif'ol yoter mikol hakavanot v'machshavot. So when you're doing the mitzvah, you can have all these intents and all these thoughts. And he gives you some ideas of where you can find some of these ideas. And thought does not replace action. In all situations, action supersedes thought. You can't, with your thoughts, do any particular action unless you actually act out in full that action. And that's why we cannot fulfill a mitzvah just with thought. And we can also see this in Avraham Avinu. Dafka al masa mitzvah. He was very careful in how he did a mitzvah. Right? He got up early in the morning. He be'ed asher nitztave al masa hakedaktiv v'yiva atze ola. He went and took the firewood. Lama bezeh haramban. Lama baka be'etzim kodem ha'aliachato. So why did he take that before his actual going? Says the Ramban, Amitin ad bo lahara Maria, Pish Ramban ki eitz shenimtza bo tolaat pasul lekarban. So he was concerned that that particular wood would not be good for a korban. V'chashash Avram ki ulai bevo shama lo yala eitz shekvar lekorban. Maybe I won't have. Over there, I won't have wood with which to light a fire. Right? That's why he brought firewood for the sacrifice. Wood that was kosher for an ola. That's why it's called wood of an ola. It wasn't an ola yet. It wasn't the sacrifice yet. But he brought it, and once he already packed it and brought it, it was as if it was done. And that, my friends, that is exactly what Rav Shor is trying to say here. That as soon as Avraham has a mitzvah to do, his intent is so on fire. He knows exactly what he's doing and how he's going to do it, and he wants to do that mitzvah 100%. So much so that when he already starts doing the mitzvah, it's as if that mitzvah was done. And just like the wood for the ola is called ola wood even before it was used for the ola, even before it was used for the sacrifice, so too, Yitzchak's sacrifice happened as soon as Avraham prepared for it. It was as good as done. The mitzvah happened. He goes on to say, he quotes different sources. We're a little bit over time, but it's worth to. I have the whole essay here for you in case you have the opportunity to read it. It's beautiful. But what he ends up saying is like this, that there are people like Avraham who, once they start doing a mitzvah, first of all, let's back up. Most of us do not do the mitzvah just by thinking about it. That's what he starts off with, right? Yeah, just because I have the intent or all the kavanas of davening, but I don't actually daven, I didn't daven. I don't get the mitzvah for davening just because I had all the right intents, right? Just because I had all the right thoughts, right? I figured out the gematria of Shema or whatever. So therefore, something. No, it doesn't mean anything. You have to actually say Shema and have the right kavanas, ideally. But that's not how Avraham operates. Avraham is on a different level, because when he wants to do a mitzvah, he's already dedicated every single aspect of the mitzvah for that mitzvah. He's all ready for it. The wood that was not Ola wood became Ola wood as soon as Avraham gathered it, because he knew he was going to use it for a sacrifice, for an Ola. And it became Ola wood immediately. It took on that name. Similarly, Yitzchak, although he was not sacrificed, as soon as Avraham had the kavanah to do it, it was already as if it was done. Which is why, by the way, we mentioned in our prayers, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we mentioned the ashes of the Akedat Yitzchak should be in our merit. The ashes of the Akedat Yitzchak? What ashes? There's no ashes. He wasn't killed. He wasn't burned. What ashes are we talking about? It's as if there are ashes of Yitzchak's sacrifice. It's as if they're there because Avraham was about to do it. And when Avraham about to do it, it's as if it's done. We can be on such a level when we do mitzvot that the mitzvah takes on a life of its own, and it's as if it's done before we even do it, if we have the right intent. Most of us, definitely myself, our intent, as good as it can be, is pales in comparison to Avraham. So when Avraham has a machshava, when Avraham has a mitzvah he's about to do, that mitzvah is done as soon as he thinks about it. The rest of us, we have a lot of preparation to do, and we have a lot of things to fix in our performance of mitzvot. And God willing, as we continue, as we learn Torah together, and as we see more and more miracles, God willing, in Eretz Yisrael and around the world for the Jewish people, we'll see that that our merits, our zchuyot for the mitzvot that we're doing and that we're about to do have great ramifications, and the effects of the mitzvah echoes even before the mitzvah is done. Thank you for listening. I'm going to stop the live feed to Facebook.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.